your experience across a range of different organisations, what's the key to effectively engaging a business with a core strategy and driving meaningful change?
There's a lot of layers to that. I think first of all, I think it's really important to remember that the human element of a business touches everything. So it starts with purpose. Is it meaningful? Is it clear? Which is really the why. And then there's what are we trying to accomplish? What are the priorities? What's the outcome that we want to achieve? Which is the what we do. So again, nothing happens without people doing it. And then finally, it's the how you go about it. And the how is really interesting because the how is where I think most of the challenge is bringing those, the aspirations you have, taking a purpose, turning it into priorities and delivering it is really the challenge. So to me, it's really about clarity around why we're here, what are we trying to accomplish, and how we're going to go about doing it. And that is a lot easier said than done.
Yeah. What do you think about the mindset challenge? I mean, sometimes you're dealing with employees that have been in the organisation for a while. There might be some cynicism about a new transformation or a new CEO and the direction the organisation's heading. So have you sort of come across any techniques or tools or approaches that you've used successfully when you really need to shift mindset at an organisational level?
Yeah, it's interesting there because, in the, my experiences with some of the US corporates I worked with, like Microsoft, for instance, one of the things I had to overcome when I became the managing director of Microsoft in Australia was a really overwhelming view that we can't do that unless the corporation allows us to do it.
Yeah.
And so with mindsets around things like that, the only way to break through them is not through words, but through action. So you have to demonstrate why in what you're trying to accomplish that thing that might have stopped it in the past or what might have happened in the past is no longer relevant. And you have to push on and push through because the thing that changes culture is not just having a clear set of values, it's actually every element. It's the why, the what, and the how. And if you progress and evolve the why, the purpose, the what, the priorities, and the how, you change the culture. People get used to doing things differently. People accept a different environment. But there's no simple words to get over that. You have to actually be firm about getting clarity around those critical things, and through action, allow people to experience the new way or the new thing that you are pursuing.
Seeing you brought up US companies, we've done a bit of work in the US as well, and I've found there's quite a difference between the US approach and the Australian approach. And one of the things I think the US companies do quite well is they put more focus on motivation and inspiration. Sometimes in Australia, because of the culture, that's frowned upon. And organisations spend all their time on capability uplift where there might be a motivational challenge. So in your experience, have you seen that as well? Do you think we undercook that whole inspirational piece over here because we generally play things down a bit? And do you think it's an opportunity for Australian organisations to get that balance a bit better? Or?
Yeah, it's interesting. See, most of my career has been with US-based companies in Australia and New Zealand. And the culture of those companies and the way they operated was embraced. The whole drive to achieve an outcome, the competitiveness of it, the energy behind it that leaders who are based in North America possess also flow into very comfortably the Australian operations and the Kiwi operations of those companies. Mm-hmm. So I actually think it's more an industry thing and than perhaps an Aussie thing. And I think that the tech industry is an industry that's embraced change continuously for many, many decades and adopted practices that are really relevant to your business and what you're talking to your clients about, which is how to engage potential customers and customers we have in more effectively getting value from what it is we have to offer. So I think, I don't know that, the intensity of meeting the customer every day in a changing way is perhaps as has been probably historically not as big an imperative. And in the technology industry also, you also know that the success you have today is not guaranteed in the future. And I think that's been much harder for other industries to get their heads around.
Yeah.
So it's a complex question that you ask, and I do think that the tech industry is progressive in engaging people in a change outcome, and I think other industries are definitely moving that way too as they become more digital and more technology oriented. And certainly they and the leaders I've met in those other industries are very keen to continue to develop their businesses down that path. It's always difficult. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be at Apple when Steve Jobs came back, and I always say that his most significant contribution to Apple was not innovation, it was the courage to stop 75% of the product development that Apple was doing to focus on the core Macintosh proposition. And, you know, you look back on that and say, well, that's logical. But at the time, it was a gutsy decision. I mean, one of the decisions was to terminate a product called the Newton that had 2,000 developers in business developing applications for that product.
Yeah.
And he had the courage to make that decision. So there's no science to this one. It's a combination of the disciplines around strategy and prioritization through to the individual courage and conviction of a leader and the leadership team.
Yeah.
And I've been in more prioritization meetings than I actually want to be.
Yeah, to remember.
Yeah, I mean, it is the most grueling thing because it's a choice. It's a choice between a bad outcome and a bad outcome. Which one's less bad? Do too much, you lose focus. Do too little, you might miss out. So that's a really important question of leadership.
I think your industry insight, talking about tech versus other industries, is quite relevant there as well. So if you're in a comfortable space, the inclination as a leader is to hedge bets and invest in 4 or 5 different things. Sometimes, but when you're in a position where you've got to make a big call, it's actually advantageous because it does give you that focus. And as you were speaking before about prioritization, I was thinking a lot of it's really mindset and alignment, because any senior executive worth their salt can take a project they wanted to do and retrofit it into your strategic objectives and say, here's exactly how this work aligns to that goal.
That happens.
It's a core skill, right?
Yeah,
so it's really about being fully aligned with the direction of the organisation and saying, you know, I could make this fit into the values and the objectives, but I'm not going to try because I understand where we're taking this business. It's that mindset and connection at the senior levels that matters, Yeah,
you know what I think the answer to that is? It's not an easy one to implement, let me tell you. But what you have to do is, with the priorities that you define as a leadership team, right? Because if your leadership team is the United Nations of functions, where they all go away to their functional teams and basically interpret strategy to be whatever they want it to be, you exactly get what you're talking about. But if you, as the CEO, demand that the leadership team signs up collectively to the most important things, and that they own it, then you've got a good start. But then what you have to do is you have to define what does it mean and how are we going to do it for those critical things.
Yeah.
So don't try and define everything the company does. Define the business changing strategy executing most important, and define what the work program is there together, so that when the work does cascade through the organisation, there's no room for interpretation as to what it meant function by function. Now, you let them run right with everything else, quite frankly. You can't worry about everything everybody's doing. You've got to trust the management. But what you can't trust is that the most important change things will rise above the noise of everyday normality to get the focus and resources that they need.
Yeah.
And that's, again, beyond focus, that's another significant leadership challenge, which is the alignment challenge. Yep. How do we make sure the money, the people, the technology and resources are being put behind the things we've agreed are the most important? And that way you can kind of combat this danger that strategic priorities get interpreted function by function to be what we were going to do anyway, because we thought it was the right thing to do.
And in that scenario, the strategy is just pretend. there's a group of people trying to achieve their own objectives and they're just aligning with words only.
Yeah.
And that's so different to a leadership team that is almost risen above a functional or a business unit.
You're sort of taking that back to something earlier around, the Microsoft example of, Corp won't let us do that, or we tried to do that in the past, it didn't work. We implemented 2 programs that I thought really made a difference to the culture because it changed how we thought and acted. One was really about, we called it, are you a victim or are you a leader? And that was really about talking through our responses to situations that go bad or are thrust upon us. And how do we respond? Yeah. And the whole point of being responsible, not responsible for the issue, but responsible.
Yeah.
How can you respond as bad as this situation is? And then the other one, which, I always credit Satya Nadella because I read it and heard him say it first, is I'll take a learn it all over a know it all every day of the week. And this whole notion of are you a learner or are you a knower?
Yeah.
And at Microsoft was important because there was a real knowing culture that came from a super intelligent founder.
Yep.
And was great when Microsoft was right at the top of their game. As soon as the world changed around Microsoft, it was really important to evolve the culture to be a much more listening and learning culture. And those 2 dimensions, just even having the conversation, and it took on a bit of momentum across the organisation because people would say stuff like, the example you gave, and then there was a correcting mechanism in the room because there was a language that said, oh, look, you're being a bit of a victim now, Steve. Like, understand it's an issue, but I reckon, we can respond to this. And I often do this. Whenever I think I know something now, I get a little voice in my head that goes, you're being a know-it-all, be careful.
Yeah.
Because what you know may not be the way it is.
May not be so.
Yeah, exactly.